The first thing they did was laugh. I was standing behind my small fruit cart outside Oak Ridge Mall arranging fresh peaches in a wooden basket when a group of well-dressed women walked past me. One of them slowed down, looked at my cart, and wrinkled her nose as if the scent of oranges offended her. "Seriously," she said loudly to her friends, "they let street vendors stand in front of a place like this?" Another woman dug into her purse, pulled out a few coins, and tossed them into my basket of apples. "There you go, sweetheart," she said with a smirk. "Maybe now you can afford lunch." They laughed as they walked toward the glass doors. I simply looked up at the massive building behind them, because none of them knew that every store, every escalator, every shining window inside Oak Ridge Mall belonged to me. And my name is Amy White. If this moment already makes you feel something, anger, curiosity, maybe even disbelief, go ahead and tap the like button so this story can reach more people. And if you enjoy stories about family pride and the truth finally coming out, consider subscribing to the channel. But before we continue, tell me something in the comments. Where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? I'm always amazed by how far these stories travel. Now, let me tell you how an old woman selling fruit ended up owning an entire mall. Most people who passed by my fruit cart every morning believed they understood my entire life in a single glance. To them, I was just an elderly woman trying to make a few dollars selling fruit outside a busy shopping mall. They saw the old wooden cart with its chipped paint. They saw the simple folding chair I sat on when my legs got tired. They saw the handwritten cardboard signs that said, asterisk, asterisk, fresh peaches, $2, asterisk, asterisk, or asterisk, asterisk, sweet strawberries, $3, asterisk, asterisk. And they assumed they knew everything about me. What they didn't know was that I had been standing in that exact spot long before most of the stores inside Oak Ridge Mall had even opened their doors. My name is Amy White. I'm 67 years old, and every weekday morning I arrive at the front plaza of Oak Ridge Mall before the sun fully rises. Chicago mornings can be cold, especially in early spring. Sometimes the wind cuts through the streets like a blade. On those mornings, I wear the thick gray coat my late husband bought me years ago. It's worn around the cuffs, but it's still warm. I park my small pickup truck in the back service lot behind the mall. Then I unload the fruit crates one by one. Apples, oranges, peaches, grape. In summer, I add watermelon slices and strawberries. In fall, I bring crisp red apples and pears. By the time the mall security guards begin their shift change around 8 in the morning, my cart is already arranged neatly. The fruit is always organized carefully. I believe presentation matters even for something as simple as a peach. The first people I usually see are the mall employees. Retail workers rushing in with coffee cups, cleaning crews arriving with their carts, a few early shoppers who like to walk inside the mall before the crowds appear. Some of them stop by to buy fruit. Others stop just to talk. One of the janitors, a kind older man named Harold, always buys an apple from me every Monday morning. Doctor says an apple a day, he jokes each week. And every week I reply, then I'm basically part of your healthcare plan. We laugh the same way every time. There's also a young barista from the cafe inside the mall. Her name is Lily. She's probably 23, always cheerful, even at 8 in the morning. Sometimes she brings me a small cup of coffee when business is slow. You shouldn't be sitting out here in the cold without something warm, she tells me. I always try to pay her for it. She never accepts. Consider it a fruit discount, she says with a grin. Not everyone is kind, of course. Some people walk past my cart as if I'm invisible. Others glance at the fruit but wrinkle their noses like the women you heard about earlier. And then there are the security guards. The older guards know me well. One of them, a tall man named Frank, has worked at Oak Ridge Mall for nearly 15 years. He tips his hat to me every morning when he walks by. "Morning, Mrs. White," he says. "Morning, Frank," I reply. But every now and then, the mall hires new guards. The new ones usually don't recognize me. And when they see an elderly woman selling fruit near the entrance, they assume I'm a problem. One young guard approached me about 2 months ago. His uniform still looks stiff and new. "You can't set up shop here," he said firmly. I looked up at him and smiled gently. "I've been standing here for a while," I said. "That doesn't matter," he replied. "Mall management doesn't allow vendors out front." Before I could respond, Frank happened to walk out of the building. He stopped when he saw the situation. "It's fine," Frank told the young guard. The young man frowned, but I said, "It's fine," Frank repeated. The guard looked confused, but eventually walked away. Frank turned to me with an apologetic smile. "New guy," he said, "still learning." I simply nodded. "I understand." What I didn't tell the young guard that morning was that mall management had known about my fruit cart long before he ever applied for his job. Because Oak Ridge Mall had been a part of my life for decades. Every brick in that building carried a memory. Every hallway reminded me of a dream that once belonged to my husband. Sometimes, when the morning crowd quiets down, I find myself looking up at the tall glass windows of the mall. The sunlight reflects across the building like a sheet of gold. People passing by probably think I'm just admiring the architecture. But in truth, I'm remembering. I'm remembering long nights sitting at a kitchen table covered in blueprints. I'm remembering conversations about loans, land permits, and construction delays. I'm remembering the excitement in my husband's voice the first time he said the words, asterisk, asterisk, Oak Ridge Mall. Asterisk, asterisk. Back then, it wasn't a mall yet. It was just a vacant lot with weeds growing through cracked pavement. But to him, it was the beginning of something big. To him, it was a dream. And to me, it still is. Of course, the people walking past my fruit cart don't know any of that. To them, I'm simply the old woman selling peaches outside the entrance. Some customers treat me with kindness. Others treat me with pity. And a few treat me with quiet respect. But there's one group of people who have always struggled to understand why I choose to stand there every day. My own family. My son Daniel has asked me many times why I keep doing this. "You don't have to work anymore, Mom," he told me once over dinner. "You should be relaxing, traveling, enjoying life." I remember smiling at him softly. "Talking to people is enjoying life," I said, but Daniel never quite understood that answer. And his wife understood it even less. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa White, believes appearances matter more than anything else. To her, image is everything. And nothing embarrasses her more than seeing her husband's mother selling fruit in front of a luxury shopping center. What Vanessa never realized was that the mall behind my little cart wasn't just a place I happened to stand near. It was the very place that had once changed our entire lives. But that part of the story, Daniel never knew. Not yet. My son Daniel White has always been a good man. That's the truth I hold on to whenever I think about the complicated moments between us. Daniel isn't cruel. He isn't selfish. But sometimes, like many people, he sees the world through the lens of what others might think. Daniel is 38 now, tall like his father was with the same thoughtful eyes and quiet confidence. He works as a real estate consultant in downtown Chicago. It's a respectable job, one that allows him to move in circles where appearances and reputations matter a great deal. His office sits on the 15th floor of a sleek glass building overlooking the river. When clients meet him, they see a polished, professional, tailored suits, clean handshake, careful words. Daniel has built his career on understanding property values, market trends, and investment potential. Ironically, one of the most valuable properties connected to his life has always been the one he knows the least about. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Daniel calls me almost every Sunday evening. It has been our routine for years. "Hi, Mom," he usually says. "How was your week?" Sometimes he asks about my health. Sometimes he asks about the weather. But eventually the conversation almost always drifts to the same topic. "Are you still selling fruit outside that mall?" he'll ask. And every time I give him the same answer. "Yes, Daniel, I am." I can hear the quiet sigh on the other end of the phone. "Mom, you don't have to do that anymore." He has said those words so many times that I could probably recite them before he even speaks them. "You're 67, he continues. "You should be resting. You should be enjoying retirement." I usually laugh softly when he says that. "You say that like I'm 90, I tell him. "That's not the point," Daniel replies. Then his voice lowers slightly the way it always does when he's trying to be gentle but honest. "Some of my clients shop at Oak Ridge Mall. If they see you out there with a fruit cart, they might get the wrong impression." The wrong impression. I know exactly what he means. In Daniel's professional world, people associate success with certain images. Expensive offices, nice cars, elegant homes. Not an elderly mother selling peaches from a wooden cart. Daniel. I say calmly, "I've been doing this for years. It makes me happy." "But why there?" he asks. "Why in front of that mall of all places?" For a moment, I always pause before answering. Because the real reason isn't something I've ever shared with him. "I just like that spot," I finally say. He never seems satisfied with that explanation, but he lets the subject drop eventually. Daniel has always respected me enough not to push too hard. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about his wife. Vanessa White entered Daniel's life about 8 years ago. The first time I met her, she arrived at dinner wearing a white blazer and carrying a designer handbag that probably cost more than my old pickup truck. She was beautiful, there's no denying that. Vanessa had long, dark hair, flawless makeup, and the confident smile of someone who understood exactly how she appeared to others. She worked in marketing at the time and had big ambitions. During that first dinner, she asked me many polite questions. "What do you do, Amy?" she said with a bright smile. "I sell fruit," I answered honestly. For a brief moment, the smile on her face froze. It lasted only a second, but I noticed it. "Oh," she said. Then she quickly recovered and continued the conversation. At the time, I thought perhaps she was just surprised. But as the years passed, I began to understand something about Vanessa. She wasn't comfortable with anything that might lower her social standing. Vanessa cared deeply about how people perceived her life. Her clothes were always elegant. Her social media pages were filled with pictures of restaurants, vacations, and carefully posed photos with friends. And eventually my fruit cart became a problem in her carefully curated world. The first time she confronted me about it happened about 3 years ago. Daniel had invited me over for dinner at their apartment. After we finished eating, Vanessa asked if she could speak with me privately. We stepped out onto their balcony overlooking the city. The wind moved lightly through her hair as she crossed her arms. "Amy," she began, "I wanted to talk to you about something." "Of course," I said. "It's about the fruit cart." I waited. Vanessa sighed softly as if preparing herself to say something uncomfortable. "Some of our friends shop at Oak Ridge Mall," she explained. "A few of them have mentioned seeing you out there." And I asked calmly, "Well," she hesitated before continuing, "it's just a little embarrassing." The word hung in the air between us. Embarrassing. I mean, she added quickly, Daniel works in real estate. Image matters in his business. If people think his mother is struggling financially, her voice trailed off. I looked at the city lights stretching across the Chicago skyline. Then I turned back to her. "Vanessa," I said gently, "I'm not struggling." I know she replied quickly, "But people don't know that." There it was again. What people think, what people see, what people assume. Vanessa stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Maybe you could sell somewhere else," she suggested. "A farmer's market maybe, or a neighborhood street. Just not in front of the mall." I studied her face for a moment. She wasn't trying to be cruel. In her mind, she was protecting Daniel's reputation. But she was also protecting her own image. "I appreciate your concern," I said. "But I like that spot." Vanessa's expression tightened. "You're really not going to move?" she asked. "No," I replied simply. That was the first time I saw real frustration in her eyes. Over the years, she brought up the topic many more times, sometimes politely, sometimes with thinly disguised irritation. But I never moved my cart, not even an inch. Because every time I stand outside Oak Ridge Mall, I'm reminded of something Vanessa and even Daniel have never fully understood. That mall isn't just a shopping center. It's the final piece of a dream my husband and I once built together. And the story behind that dream started long before Vanessa White ever walked into our lives. Long before Oak Ridge Mall became the shining center of shopping that people see today, it was nothing more than a quiet, empty piece of land surrounded by old warehouses and cracked sidewalks. Most people driving past it years ago wouldn't have noticed it at all. But my husband did. George White had a way of seeing possibilities where other people only saw problems. When we first moved to that part of Chicago decades ago, we lived in a small 2-bedroom house with creaky wooden floors and a backyard that flooded every spring. Money was tight, but George never complained. Instead, he dreamed. George worked in construction during the day, long hours, hard labor. Some nights he came home so exhausted that he fell asleep in the living room chair before dinner was ready. But no matter how tired he was, his mind was always moving. I still remember the evening he first told me about the land that would eventually become Oak Ridge Mall. We were sitting at our tiny kitchen table. The table was old and uneven, one leg slightly shorter than the others, so George had wedged a folded newspaper under it to keep it steady. He spread a folded map across the surface. "Amy," he said, tapping the paper with his finger, "look at this." I leaned closer. It was a map of the neighborhood. His finger pointed to a rectangular section of land not far from where we lived. "That old warehouse lot?" I asked. "Exactly." I frowned slightly. "George, that place has been abandoned for years." "That's the point," he said with a grin. His eyes were bright with excitement, the way they always were when he had an idea. "Think about it," he continued. "This area is growing. New families are moving in. Businesses are opening. But there's nowhere for people to shop nearby. Everyone has to drive 20 minutes just to reach a decent shopping center." He paused, letting the idea settle. "What if we built one here?" I laughed at first. Not because the idea was foolish, but because it seemed impossible. "George," I said gently, "we barely have enough savings for home repairs." "I know," he replied, "but that land is cheaper than it should be because no one thinks it's valuable yet." He leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "But I do." That was George. He believed in things long before the world caught up. Over the next several months, that empty lot became the center of our lives. George researched zoning laws and development plans. He spoke to local business owners about what the neighborhood needed. He spent evenings drawing sketches on graph paper, imagining what the shopping center could look like. He didn't dream about something extravagant. George wasn't interested in luxury brands or fancy boutiques. His vision was simpler. He wanted a place where small businesses could grow. A grocery store, a pharmacy, a bakery, a bookstore, a handful of clothing shops. A place where families could gather. Eventually, he gave the dream a name, Oak Ridge Mall. I asked him why he chose that name. He smiled and said, "Because it sounds like something that's always been here. But dreams, especially big ones, don't come easily. Buying the land required money we didn't have. George met with banks. Most of them turned him away. One loan officer actually laughed when George explained his plan. A mall, the man said. In that neighborhood. George came home that day looking tired but not defeated. "What did they say?" I asked. "They said no," he admitted. Then he shrugged. "So we'll try somewhere else." That determination was one of the things I loved most about him. Eventually, after months of meetings and paperwork, one small community bank agreed to take a chance on us. But the loan required everything we owned as collateral. Very impressive. Our savings. Everything. I remember sitting at that same kitchen table again, the loan papers spread out in front of us. George looked at me carefully. "This is a risk," he said. "A big one." "I know," I replied. "If this fails," he continued, "we could lose everything." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Then we'll start over," I said. He studied my face for a moment. "You really believe we can do this?" "I believe in you," I answered. That was all he needed. Construction began the following spring. For nearly 2 years, our lives revolved around that building site. George worked there almost every day, overseeing the progress alongside contractors and engineers. Sometimes I brought him lunch in the afternoons. We would sit on overturned buckets in the middle of the dusty construction site, eating sandwiches while watching workers raise steel beams into place. Each time a new section of the building was completed, George would walk me through it like a proud tour guide. "This will be the entrance," he said once, standing in the middle of what was still an empty concrete floor. "And over there will be the escalators." At the time, it was difficult to imagine, but slowly, piece by piece, the dream became real. Walls went up, glass windows were installed, parking lots were paved, and one morning, standing beside George at the edge of the property, I saw the sign being lifted into place, Oak Ridge Mall. George squeezed my hand. "We did it," he said quietly. But life has a way of changing plans when you least expect it. Only a few months before the mall's official opening, George began complaining about chest pains. At first, he brushed it off as stress. "Just tired," he told me. But the pain grew worse. One night, he collapsed in our living room. The doctors said it was a massive heart attack. George White passed away 3 days later. And just like that, the man who had dreamed Oak Ridge Mall into existence was gone. Many people assumed the mall would never open after that. Without George, they believed the project would fall apart. They didn't know that George had left something else behind. Not just blueprints, not just contracts. He left behind a promise, and I intended to keep it. When George died, the world around me seemed to fall into a silence so deep, it felt almost unreal. For weeks, the house felt emptier than I ever thought possible. Every corner reminded me of him. His coffee mug still sat beside the sink. His jacket still hung on the back of the kitchen chair. Even the faint smell of sawdust and aftershave seemed to linger in the air. Grief has a strange way of slowing time. Some days felt like minutes. Others felt like years. But while I was still trying to process the loss of my husband, reality was already knocking at my door. The bank called only 2 weeks after the funeral. The construction company needed direction. The contractors wanted to know whether the project would continue. The lenders wanted reassurance that the loan would still be honored. To them, Oak Ridge Mall was a financial investment. To me, it was George's final dream, and walking away from it never felt like an option. I remember sitting at the same kitchen table where George and I had first looked at that map years earlier, the same uneven table with the folded newspaper under one leg. But this time I was alone. The project documents were spread out in front of me. Contracts, financial plans, construction schedules. I stared at them for a long time. George had handled most of the negotiations and planning. I had supported him every step of the way, but I was never meant to lead the project alone. At least that's what many people believed. The next morning, I drove to the construction site. The building was nearly finished by then. The steel structure was complete. The glass panels had been installed. Workers were finishing the interior spaces where stores would soon open. When I stepped out of my truck, the construction foreman, a large man named Carl Jensen, walked toward me. Carl had worked closely with George from the beginning. His expression softened when he saw me. "Mrs. White," he said gently, "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I replied. Carl hesitated before speaking again. "Listen, I wanted to ask you something." I nodded. What happens now?" he asked carefully. He didn't mean the construction schedule. He meant the entire project. Would it continue, or would the bank take everything? For a moment, I looked around the building site. Workers were still moving equipment. Trucks were delivering materials. Electricians were installing lighting fixtures. George's dream was standing right in front of me. "I'm finishing it," I said. Carl blinked in surprise. "You are—" "Yes." He studied my face as if trying to determine whether I fully understood what I was saying. "This isn't a small project," he said. "I know. There are investors involved, contractors, banks." "I know," I repeated. Carl crossed his arms. "Your husband handled most of those negotiations." "I know that too." Silence hung between us for a moment. Finally, Carl sighed. "Well," he said, "George always told me you were tougher than people thought." I smiled slightly. He was right. And that was how it began. The following months were the most difficult period of my life. Grief didn't disappear simply because there was work to do, but the work gave my days purpose. I spent hours meeting with bankers, more hours reviewing legal documents. I sat through construction briefings, budget meetings, and planning sessions that George had once led himself. Some people respected my determination. Others clearly doubted me. I could see it in their expressions during meetings. A few investors spoke slowly as if explaining complicated ideas to someone who wouldn't understand. One even suggested postponing the entire project. With Mr. White gone, he said the market might lose confidence. I looked him directly in the eye. "The market will open exactly when we planned," I replied. He never questioned me again. Of course, not everyone was skeptical. There were people who had believed in George from the beginning, and they believed in finishing what he started. One of them was Michael Rivera. At the time, Michael was a young property manager with sharp instincts and a calm personality. George had hired him to help oversee the operational planning for the mall. Michael became one of my strongest allies. During one meeting with several contractors, a dispute broke out about delivery schedules and costs. The room grew tense as voices rose. I remained quiet, listening. Finally, Michael leaned over and whispered something to me. If we move the opening date back 2 weeks, he suggested we can solve most of these delays without increasing the budget. I considered his idea carefully. Then I spoke. "That's what we'll do." The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward me, and that was the moment they began to realize something. George may have been the dreamer who imagined Oak Ridge Mall, but I was the one who was going to make sure it survived. The mall opened 6 months later. The day of the grand opening was bright and warm. Crowds filled the parking lot before the doors even opened. Families, local business owners, reporters from neighborhood newspapers, everyone came to see the new shopping center. I stood near the entrance beside the large sign that read ***, Oak Ridge Mall ***. For a moment, I closed my eyes. I wished George could see it, but in a way I believed he could, because every store, every light, every customer walking through those doors was proof that his dream had become real. The mall was a success almost immediately. Stores filled the retail spaces. Restaurants opened. Foot traffic grew steadily each year, and eventually Oak Ridge Mall became one of the busiest shopping centers in that part of Chicago. But while the world saw the mall as a successful business venture, I saw something else. I saw the promise I had made to the man I loved, and that promise shaped every decision I made afterward, including one very unusual decision, a decision that would later confuse my son and frustrate my daughter-in-law more than anything else in the world. Because years after Oak Ridge Mall became successful, I chose to stand outside its entrance, selling fruit. After Oak Ridge Mall opened, life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. The early years were busy ones. A shopping center, especially a new one, requires constant attention. Stores come and go. Tenants negotiate leases. Maintenance issues appear without warning. Marketing campaigns must be planned to bring in more customers. For a long time, my days were filled with meetings, phone calls, and financial reports. I worked closely with the management team to ensure the mall ran smoothly. Michael Rivera, who had helped during construction, became the general operations manager. He was smart, steady, and loyal, exactly the kind of person you want overseeing a place that thousands of people walk through every day. Michael handled the daily operations, but I remained the majority owner. Most people involved in the business world knew my name. Lawyers, accountants, investors, and local developers were familiar with Amy White, the woman who had completed the Oak Ridge Mall project after her husband's death. But outside those professional circles, I preferred to remain quiet. I never liked attention. I never enjoyed being treated like some kind of powerful business figure. George had always been the one who liked talking about big plans. I was the one who preferred listening. Over time, as the mall stabilized financially, my direct involvement became less necessary. Michael and the management team ran the operations efficiently, and the property continued to grow in value year after year. Technically, I could have retired completely. Many people suggested that I should. My lawyer once told me, "Amy, you could spend the rest of your life traveling and never worry about money again." But money was never the reason we built Oak Ridge Mall. The real reason was community. George believed a successful business should serve people, not just profit from them. That idea stayed with me long after he was gone. And eventually it led me to a decision that surprised almost everyone. About 5 years after the mall opened, I started thinking about how disconnected my life had become. Most of my days were spent reading financial documents or attending meetings with people in suits. The conversations were always about numbers, rent revenue expansion. Important topics, yes, but something was missing. I missed the simple human moments. The casual conversations George and I used to have with neighbors. The feeling of being part of the everyday life of the community. One morning, I drove to the local farmers market to buy produce. As I walked between the stalls, I noticed the vendors chatting with customers, laughing, with children offering samples of fruit. There was something warm and genuine about those small interactions. It reminded me of a story George once told me. When he was younger, long before we met, he used to help his father sell fruit from a roadside stand. George had described those days with a nostalgic smile. "People tell you their whole life stories when they buy fruit," he once said. "You learn a lot about the world that way." That memory stayed with me, and a few weeks later, I made a decision. I bought a small fruit cart. The cart itself wasn't anything fancy, just a sturdy wooden frame with 2 wheels and a flat surface where baskets of fruit could be displayed. At first, even Michael Rivera thought I was joking. "You want to do what he asked during one of our meetings." "I want to sell fruit outside the mall," I said. Michael blinked. "The mall that you own?" "Yes." He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead. "Amy, you don't need to do that." "I know," I said calmly, "but I want to." Michael studied me carefully. "Is this some kind of experiment?" he asked. I smiled. "No, it's just something I want to try." Michael eventually accepted my decision, though I could tell he still found it unusual. We agreed on a simple arrangement. I would set up my fruit cart in the plaza area near the main entrance of Oak Ridge Mall. Technically, that space was still part of the property, so there were no legal issues. And because Michael handled the day-to-day operations, most employees and customers had no idea who the real owner was anyway. The first day I brought the cart outside the mall, I felt strangely nervous. I had spent years managing a multi-million-dollar property. Yet standing behind that small cart with baskets of apples and peaches made my heart beat faster than any business meeting ever had. At first, people simply walked past. Some glanced at the fruit but kept moving. Others stopped out of curiosity. "How much for the peaches?" one woman asked. $2, I replied. She bought 3. That was my first sale. It may sound silly, but I still remember it clearly. Over time, more people began stopping by. Some customers bought fruit on their way into the mall. Others bought it while leaving. Many simply paused for a moment to talk. I learned their names, their jobs, their families. One man bought bananas every Wednesday because his daughter loved them. Another woman stopped every Friday afternoon to buy strawberries for her grandchildren. These small conversations brought a sense of life back into my days. I wasn't just a business owner reading reports anymore. I was part of the daily rhythm of the community again. Of course, not everyone understood my choice. Some people assumed I was struggling financially. Others believed I was simply bored. But I never bothered correcting them, because the truth was simple. Selling fruit made me feel connected to the world again. It reminded me of George. It reminded me of the early days when everything we had was built with our own hands. For a long time, my fruit cart existed quietly outside Oak Ridge Mall without causing any trouble. Most people accepted it as part of the landscape, but there was one person who never accepted it. And that person was my daughter-in-law, Vanessa. To her, the fruit cart wasn't charming. It wasn't nostalgic. It was embarrassing. And eventually, her frustration with it would lead to a moment that none of us would ever forget. Vanessa White never liked my fruit cart. Not from the beginning. Not after a few months. Not even after several years had passed. To Vanessa, the cart represented something she couldn't control. And control was something she valued very much. The first time she saw it in person was about a week after I started selling fruit outside Oak Ridge Mall. At the time, Daniel had invited me to dinner at their apartment. Vanessa greeted me politely at the door the way she always did when we were face to face. "Hi, Amy," she said with a quick smile. "Hi, Vanessa," I replied. The evening went smoothly. We ate pasta, talked about Daniel's work, and discussed plans for an upcoming holiday. But toward the end of dinner, Vanessa leaned forward slightly. "So, Daniel mentioned something interesting," she said. I looked at her calmly. "Oh, he said you've started selling fruit outside Oak Ridge Mall." Daniel shifted slightly in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. "Yes," I said, "I have." Vanessa blinked as if she wasn't sure she had heard correctly. "You mean, like a street vendor?" "I suppose that's one way to describe it." She looked at Daniel for a moment before turning back to me. "But why?" The question sounded simple, but the tone behind it was layered with confusion and disbelief. "I enjoy it," I replied. Vanessa frowned. "You enjoy it?" "Yes." She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "Amy, that's a luxury shopping center." "I'm aware," I said gently. "There are designer stores there," she continued. "High-end boutiques, restaurants, people with money." I nodded. "And your point?" "My point," Vanessa said carefully, "is that it's not exactly the place people expect to see someone selling fruit from a cart." Daniel finally spoke. "Vanessa." But she continued. "I'm just saying it might look strange." "Strange how?" I asked. Vanessa hesitated. She glanced at Daniel again, then lowered her voice slightly. "People might think you're struggling." The same concern Daniel had mentioned before. The difference was that Daniel had said it with worry. Vanessa said it with embarrassment. "I'm not struggling," I replied calmly. "I know," she said quickly, "but other people don't know that." There it was again. The invisible audience Vanessa always seemed to imagine watching her life. Daniel rubbed his temples lightly. "Mom," he said, "Vanessa just means—" "I understand what she means," I interrupted gently. Vanessa leaned forward again. "Then you understand why this could be a problem." "A problem for who?" I asked. She opened her mouth, then paused. "For Daniel's image," she finally said. Daniel looked down at the table. I studied Vanessa's expression for a moment. She wasn't trying to be cruel, at least not intentionally, but her world revolved around appearances. And in that world, my fruit cart didn't fit. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but I'm not moving." Vanessa's jaw tightened slightly. "You're really serious about this?" "Yes." The conversation ended there, but the tension didn't. Over the next few months, Vanessa mentioned the fruit cart several more times, sometimes casually, sometimes with frustration. One afternoon, she even stopped by the mall unexpectedly. I was arranging a basket of peaches when I saw her walking across the plaza toward me. Even from a distance, I could tell she wasn't happy. Her heels clicked sharply against the pavement as she approached. "Amy," she said. "Hello, Vanessa." She looked at the cart, then at the entrance of the mall behind me. This is exactly what I was talking about. I followed her gaze. Shoppers were moving in and out of the glass doors. Some glanced curiously at us. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You're standing right in front of the entrance," she said. "Yes." "With this cart?" "Yes." She lowered her voice. "My friends shop here. And if they see you." "I am your mother-in-law," I said gently. "Yes, but they don't know that," she replied quickly. I watched her carefully. What exactly worries you? I asked. Vanessa sighed. Look, Amy, I'm trying to build connections, professional ones, social ones. People talk. People always talk, I said. That's exactly my point. She gestured toward the cart. Imagine someone seeing you here, and then meeting me at a dinner party. What would they think? I shrugged lightly. Maybe they'd think you have a mother-in-law who sells excellent fruit. Vanessa did not smile. Amy, please be serious. I am serious. Her frustration was becoming more visible now. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she said. All I'm asking is for you to move the cart somewhere else. There are plenty of other streets nearby. I shook my head. I like this spot. Vanessa exhaled sharply. You're being stubborn. Perhaps. Do you have any idea how this looks? Yes, I said calmly. I do. But what I didn't say out loud was that I also understood something Vanessa didn't. I understood that true dignity doesn't come from what people think. It comes from knowing who you are. Vanessa looked at me one more time. Fine, she said finally. If you want to keep doing this, that's your choice. She turned and walked toward the mall entrance without another word. As she disappeared inside, one of my regular customers approached the cart. An older woman who bought oranges every Tuesday. She seems upset, the woman said gently. She'll be all right, I replied. But I knew Vanessa wasn't finished with the issue. In fact, her frustration was only growing, because in Vanessa's world, every problem eventually had to be solved. And she was already beginning to think of ways to solve this one. Unfortunately for her, she had no idea what kind of truth was waiting just beneath the surface. If there was one person who truly understood my unusual situation at Oak Ridge Mall, it was Michael Rivera. Michael had been there from the very beginning, long before the mall opened its doors, long before the crowds filled the parking lot, and long before anyone outside our business circle had ever heard the name Amy White connected to the property. He knew the entire story. He knew about George. He knew about the construction years. And he knew that the elderly woman selling fruit outside the mall entrance happened to be the majority owner of the entire building, which meant that whenever something unusual happened around my fruit cart, Michael was often the first person inside the mall to notice. The incident with Vanessa pretending not to know me had already irritated him. But the moment that truly tested his patience happened about 2 weeks later. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, one of the busiest shopping days of the month. The plaza outside the mall was filled with families carrying shopping bags, teenagers laughing as they walked past the entrance couples enjoying the sunny weather. My fruit cart was doing good business that day. A little boy had just convinced his mother to buy a small basket of strawberries, and I was handing him the change when I heard a familiar voice nearby. Well, look at this. I didn't even have to turn around to know who it was. Vanessa. When I looked up, she was standing a few feet away with 3 women I had never seen before. They were all dressed in expensive clothes and sunglasses, the kind of outfits that looked like they had been chosen carefully for a social media photo. Vanessa smiled at them, though the smile didn't reach her eyes. So this, she said lightly, is exactly what I was telling you about. The women looked at me and then at the fruit cart. One of them raised an eyebrow. She sets up here every day, the woman asked. Pretty much, Vanessa replied. I continued arranging the peaches quietly, pretending not to notice the conversation. Another woman stepped closer to the cart. She looked at the fruit with mild curiosity. How much are the apples, she asked. $2 each, I said politely. The woman glanced at Vanessa. Vanessa shrugged. Don't worry, she said with a laugh. She won't bite. Her friends chuckled. The third woman leaned toward Vanessa and whispered something, but not quietly enough. Is she homeless or something? Vanessa hesitated for a moment. And then she said the words that would stay with me for a long time. Oh, she's just some street vendor. Just some street vendor. The words were casual, almost careless, but they were deliberate. Vanessa knew exactly who I was, and she had chosen to erase that connection in front of her friends. I felt a small sting in my chest, not anger, not even humiliation, just disappointment. I continued placing fruit into baskets as if nothing had happened. One of Vanessa's friends suddenly reached into her purse. She pulled out a handful of coins. With a playful smirk, she tossed them into the basket of apples on my cart. The coins clinked against the fruit. There you go, she said. Keep the change. The group laughed. A few people walking past slowed down, curious about the scene. I looked at the coins for a moment. Then I gently picked them up and placed them back into the woman's hand. I think you might need these more than I do, I said calmly. Her laughter faded slightly. Vanessa's expression tightened. Before anyone could say another word, a voice came from behind them. Is there a problem here? Michael Rivera. He had stepped outside through the glass entrance doors. Michael was a tall man in his early 50s with calm eyes and a quiet authority that most employees recognized immediately. He looked at Vanessa. Then he looked at the fruit cart. Then he looked at me. The situation was obvious. Vanessa forced a polite smile. "No problem at all," she said. Michael folded his arms. I heard raised voices. "It's nothing," Vanessa replied quickly. "We were just chatting." Michael glanced at the coin still in the woman's hand. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then he looked at me. "Mrs. White," he said respectfully. "Everything all right?" Vanessa froze. One of her friends looked confused. "Mrs. White," she repeated quietly. Vanessa's expression changed instantly. "Oh, he just calls everyone that," she said quickly, waving her hand dismissively. Michael did not correct her, but the look on his face said everything. His jaw tightened slightly, and for a moment I could see the anger he was trying to control. I knew what he was thinking. He wanted to tell them. He wanted to reveal the truth right there in the middle of the plaza. But I gave him a small shake of my head. "Not yet." Michael understood. He turned back to Vanessa. "If there's no problem," he said calmly, "then I suggest we keep the entrance area clear." Vanessa forced another smile. "Of course." She turned to her friends. "Let's go inside." As they walked toward the mall doors, I heard one of the women whisper, "That guy seemed weirdly protective of the fruit lady." Vanessa didn't respond. A moment later, Michael stepped closer to the cart. His voice dropped so only I could hear him. "That was completely unacceptable," he said quietly. I shrugged lightly. "It happens." "Not here," he replied firmly. "They don't know who you are." "I know." Michael looked toward the mall entrance where Vanessa had disappeared. "I could tell them right now." "You could," I agreed, "but you won't." He studied my face carefully. "You're waiting," he said. "Yes." "For what?" "For the right moment." Michael sighed. "You're a very patient person, Amy. George used to say the same thing." Michael looked back at the fruit cart, then at the busy plaza around us. "I just hope," he said quietly, "that when that moment comes, they understand what they've done." I smiled gently. "Oh," I said, "I think they will. Because sooner or later, the truth has a way of revealing itself." And when it did, the people who had laughed the loudest that afternoon were going to remember exactly how they had treated the old woman selling fruit. If there's one thing Vanessa White loved more than appearances, it was attention. And over the years, she had become very good at creating moments that placed her at the center of it. Dinner parties, business mixers, charity galas, any event that allowed her to dress beautifully, network with influential people, and share photos online was something she embraced enthusiastically. So when she decided to host a major celebration at Oak Ridge Mall, it didn't surprise me. What surprised me was the scale of it. I first heard about the event from Daniel. He called me one evening after work, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. "Mom, Vanessa is planning something big," he said. "Oh," I replied. "Yes. She's organizing a launch event for her fashion brand." Vanessa had mentioned starting a clothing business before, but I hadn't realized she was already preparing a public launch. "That sounds ambitious," I said. "It is," Daniel admitted. "She's invited investors, influencers, and a lot of people from the Chicago business scene." "Where will the event be held?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "At Oak Ridge Mall." Of course. Vanessa had always loved the prestige of that location. Michael approved the venue space. Daniel continued. "They're setting it up in the central atrium." The atrium was the largest open area inside the mall, a beautiful space with a glass ceiling that allowed sunlight to flood the floor during the day. Perfect for an elegant event. "That should be lovely," I said. Daniel hesitated for a moment. "Vanessa also wants you to come." I paused. "Does she?" "Yes," he replied. "She said it would mean a lot to have family there." I smiled quietly. That was interesting. Because the last few times Vanessa had seen me outside the mall with my fruit cart, she had made it very clear how little she appreciated my presence. Still, I didn't refuse. "Of course I'll come," I said. Daniel sounded relieved. "Great. It's next Saturday evening." After we ended the call, I sat in my living room for a while thinking about the upcoming event. I knew Michael would be involved in organizing the space. And sure enough, the next morning, he stopped by my fruit cart on his way into the building. "Did Daniel tell you about Vanessa's party?" he asked. "Yes." Michael shook his head slightly. "She's been planning it for weeks." "I imagine she has. She wants the atrium decorated like a runway show," he continued. "Lighting rigs, a stage banners, music, the whole production." "That sounds expensive." "It is," Michael confirmed. He paused before adding, She seems to believe this event will launch her brand into the fashion world. I chuckled softly. Confidence is important in business. Michael gave me a look that suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by Vanessa's business strategy. Then he lowered his voice. You're actually going to attend? Yes. You know, she probably invited you out of obligation. I'm aware. Michael studied my expression. You're planning something, he said. No, I replied calmly. I'm just attending a party. Michael didn't look fully convinced, but he didn't press further. Over the next week, preparations for the event transformed the mall. Large banners appeared throughout the atrium, announcing *** Vanessa White, Spring Fashion Launch ***. Workers assembled a sleek stage platform. Rows of elegant chairs were arranged for guests. Technicians installed bright lights along the glass ceiling beams. Customers walking through the mall began asking employees what was happening. By Friday, the excitement was noticeable. Even my fruit cart customers talked about it. Did you hear about the big event tomorrow night? Lily the barista asked as she bought a peach. I heard something about it, I said. Apparently it's some fashion thing, she continued. A lot of important people are coming. That's what I hear. Lily smiled. Maybe you should go inside and watch. Maybe I will, I said. On the day of the event, the mall was busier than usual. Delivery trucks arrived throughout the afternoon, bringing decorations, catering supplies, and sound equipment. Michael walked past my cart several times, clearly overseeing the final preparations. Each time he passed, he gave me a small, knowing look. Around 5 o'clock, I packed up my fruit cart for the day. The evening air was cool as the sun began to set behind the buildings. I loaded the remaining fruit into my truck and drove home to get ready. I didn't own many formal outfits. My life had never revolved around fancy events. But I did have one dress that I kept for special occasions. It was simple and elegant navy blue with long sleeves and a modest neckline. George had bought it for me many years earlier when we attended the first business awards dinner after Oak Ridge Mall opened. As I slipped it on that evening, I couldn't help thinking of him. You always look beautiful in that color, he had said back then. I smiled at the memory. Then I brushed my hair, put on a pair of small pearl earrings, and drove back to the mall. The parking lot was already filled with luxury cars. Valet attendants were guiding guests toward the entrance. Inside, the atrium had been transformed completely. Soft music played through hidden speakers. The stage glowed under bright lights. Guests mingled in elegant outfits while waiters carried trays of champagne. Vanessa stood near the center of the room, greeting people with dazzling confidence. She wore a stunning silver dress that shimmered under the lights. When she saw me enter, her smile flickered for a brief second. Then she quickly walked toward me. Amy, she said. You came. Of course, I replied. She looked at my dress, clearly relieved that I hadn't arrived in my fruit-selling clothes. Well, welcome. Thank you. Vanessa gestured toward the seating area. You can sit over there, she said. I followed her gaze. The seats she indicated were near the back of the room, close to the service doors leading to the kitchen. It was the least visible area in the entire atrium, but I simply nodded. That's fine. As I walked toward the seat, I noticed Michael standing near the stage. Our eyes met briefly. He gave a small nod. Everything was ready. Because what Vanessa didn't realize that evening was that the most important moment of her entire event hadn't even begun yet. And when it did, the truth about Oak Ridge Mall was going to change the entire room. The seat Vanessa chose for me was exactly what I expected. It was positioned near the service corridor that led to the catering kitchen, far from the stage, and even farther from the guests Vanessa clearly wanted in the spotlight. Waiters passed by carrying trays of drinks, and every few minutes the kitchen doors swung open with bursts of noise and bright light from inside. It was without question the least prestigious seat in the entire atrium, but I didn't mind. In fact, I preferred it. From that quiet corner, I could see almost everything. The atrium had been transformed into something that looked more like a fashion show venue than a shopping mall. Rows of sleek white chairs faced a long, narrow runway stage that extended toward the audience. The lighting above the glass ceiling had been dimmed, leaving only the bright spotlights that illuminated the stage. Music played softly in the background while guests arrived and took their seats. I watched people walk in: investors, social media personalities, business owners, and people who simply enjoyed being invited to exclusive events. Their outfits were elegant, polished, and clearly chosen with care. Vanessa moved among them effortlessly. She greeted each guest with confident energy, laughing at jokes, shaking hands, and posing for photographs. Every movement she made seemed carefully practiced, as if she had imagined this night many times before. Daniel stood nearby, speaking with several men in tailored suits. He looked proud of Vanessa, though I could see the faint nervousness in his posture. Daniel had always been more comfortable in small meetings than in glamorous public events like this. A waiter passed my seat and offered me a glass of sparkling water. "Thank you," I said. As I sipped the drink, I noticed several guests glancing in my direction. Some looked curious. Others looked confused. To them, I was simply an older woman sitting quietly near the back of the room. My dress was simple compared to the glittering outfits around me. A few people probably assumed I was a relative of someone in the catering staff. I didn't mind. Being underestimated has its advantages. About 20 minutes later, the music shifted slightly, signaling that the event was about to begin. Guests began taking their seats. Vanessa walked toward the stage, holding a microphone with a confident smile. The lights brightened around her. "Good evening, everyone," she began. Her voice carried smoothly through the sound system. "Thank you all for coming tonight." The crowd responded with polite applause. Vanessa continued speaking about her journey in fashion, her passion for design, and the vision she had for her new clothing brand. She was a good speaker, clear, energetic, and expressive. I could tell she had rehearsed the speech many times. Daniel watched proudly from the front row. From my seat near the kitchen corridor, I could see everything. Vanessa described the inspiration behind her designs. She spoke about modern elegance, confidence, and empowerment. Every few sentences, the audience nodded or applauded. After several minutes, she gestured toward the runway stage. "And tonight," she said, "I'm excited to introduce the very first collection of Vanessa White fashion." More applause. Models began walking along the runway wearing her designs. The dresses were beautiful, flowing fabrics, modern cuts, elegant colors. I watched the show quietly. Vanessa had clearly worked hard to reach this moment. When the final model finished walking the runway, the music softened again. Vanessa returned to the center of the stage. "Thank you," she said, smiling brightly. The applause grew louder, but the evening wasn't over yet. Vanessa lifted the microphone again. "And before we conclude tonight's celebration," she said, "I want to acknowledge the incredible support system that made this event possible." She gestured toward Daniel. "My husband Daniel has been my biggest supporter." Daniel stood briefly as the crowd applauded. Vanessa continued, "And of course, we are fortunate to celebrate this moment here at the beautiful Oak Ridge Mall." She turned slightly toward the audience. "This incredible space represents opportunity, growth, and success." More applause. I noticed Michael Rivera standing near the edge of the stage. He was waiting. The moment we had discussed earlier was approaching. Vanessa continued speaking. "Chicago is a city full of ambition," she said, "and places like this mall give entrepreneurs the chance to bring their dreams to life." Her words echoed slightly under the glass ceiling. Then she added something that made me raise an eyebrow. "My husband and I have always believed that with the right vision, anything is possible." Daniel looked surprised by that line, but he smiled politely. Vanessa turned toward the audience again. "And with partnerships and opportunities like the ones here at Oak Ridge Mall, the future is incredibly bright." At that moment, Michael stepped forward. Vanessa paused as he approached the stage. She looked slightly confused, but quickly recovered. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "this is Michael Rivera, the operations manager of Oak Ridge Mall." Michael accepted the microphone. "Thank you, Vanessa," he said calmly. Vanessa stepped aside, clearly expecting a brief congratulatory comment about the event. Michael looked out over the crowd. "I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight," he said. "This mall has been part of the Chicago community for many years, and events like this remind us why it was built in the first place." He paused briefly. Then he continued. "However, before the evening ends, there's something important I would like to acknowledge." The room grew slightly quieter. Vanessa watched him with polite curiosity. Michael's voice remained steady. "The person responsible for Oak Ridge Mall being here today is actually present in this room." A murmur moved through the crowd. Vanessa smiled politely, assuming he meant one of the investors. Michael continued, "This individual completed the project after the death of its original founder." Now the room was completely silent. Vanessa's smile began to fade slightly. Michael looked toward the back of the atrium, toward the seat near the kitchen corridor, toward me. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said clearly, "the majority owner of Oak Ridge Mall is here tonight." The audience turned their heads in curiosity. Michael lifted the microphone slightly. "And her name is Amy White." For a moment, the entire atrium fell into a silence so deep that it felt almost unreal. Hundreds of eyes followed the direction of Michael Rivera's gaze, toward the back of the room, toward the quiet corner near the kitchen corridor, toward me, Amy White. I could see the confusion ripple across the crowd like a wave. Some guests turned their heads, scanning the room, as if trying to locate the person Michael had just named. Others whispered quietly to the people sitting beside them. Vanessa stood frozen at the center of the stage. The microphone in her hand lowered slowly. "Amy White," someone in the audience repeated. I set my glass of sparkling water down on the small table beside my chair. Then I stood. The movement was simple, but the reaction it caused was immediate. Every head turned toward the elderly woman in the navy blue dress standing near the service doors. The same woman many people in that room had barely noticed earlier. The same woman Vanessa had seated in the least visible place in the atrium. The same woman who just hours earlier had been selling fruit outside the mall. I walked calmly toward the stage. The sound of my footsteps echoed softly across the polished floor. With every step I took, the murmurs in the audience grew louder. "Is that her? Wait, the fruit vendor. That's the lady outside the entrance." Vanessa's face had turned pale. She looked from me to Michael, then back to me again. This must be some kind of mistake," she said quietly. Michael remained calm. "No mistake," he replied. I reached the stage and stepped up beside him. From this close, I could see the shock clearly written across Vanessa's face. Daniel looked even more stunned. "Mom," he said under his breath. Michael handed me the microphone. The weight of it felt strangely familiar in my hand. I turned toward the audience. "Good evening," I said gently. My voice echoed through the atrium. "I suppose this wasn't the introduction many of you were expecting tonight." A few people laughed nervously. Vanessa stared at me as if trying to process something impossible. "Amy," she whispered. I looked at her calmly. "Hello, Vanessa." The room remained silent as everyone waited for an explanation. I continued speaking. "My name is Amy White," I said. "And yes, I am the majority owner of Oak Ridge Mall." A collective gasp moved through the crowd. I could see people exchanging shocked looks. Daniel stepped forward from the front row. "Mommy, what he said?" His voice was filled with disbelief. You own the mall." I nodded. "Your father started the project many years ago," I explained. "When he passed away, I finished it." The silence deepened. Vanessa looked as if the ground beneath her feet had suddenly disappeared. "But that can't be right," she said. "You sell fruit outside." "Yes," I replied calmly. She shook her head. "That doesn't make sense." I smiled softly. Not everything in life revolves around what makes sense to other people. The audience listened closely now. Many of them were leaning forward in their seats, captivated by the unfolding moment. I turned slightly so everyone could hear clearly. "My husband George dreamed of building this mall long before it ever existed," I said. "He believed this neighborhood deserved a place where businesses could grow and families could gather." I paused, remembering. When he passed away before the project was finished, many people assumed the mall would never open. I glanced briefly at Michael. But some people believed in that dream. Michael nodded slightly. "So we finished it," I continued. "And over the years, Oak Ridge Mall became part of this community." I looked out across the crowd. And as for the fruit cart, a few guests smiled. That started much later. I shrugged lightly. "My husband used to sell fruit with his father when he was young. He always said those were some of the happiest days of his life." The room was completely quiet now. So one day I said I decided to try it myself. A few people chuckled softly. I discovered something interesting. I glanced at Vanessa for a brief moment. People reveal a lot about themselves when they think you're just a fruit vendor. A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Vanessa's face turned red. She knew exactly what I meant. I turned back toward the crowd. "I've met wonderful people outside that entrance," I said. "Parents buying fruit for their children, workers grabbing a snack on their way to work. But I've also met people who believe that dignity comes from money, titles, or appearances." My voice remained calm, but dignity doesn't come from those things. I looked directly at Vanessa. "It comes from how we treat others." The silence in the room became almost heavy. Daniel stepped closer to the stage. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked. There was genuine hurt in his voice. I looked at him gently. "Because I wanted you to build your own success," I said. "I didn't want my achievements to become your shortcut." Daniel's eyes filled with emotion. "But all these years." "Yes," I said. "All these years." Vanessa suddenly spoke again. "You let everyone think you were poor," she said. "I let people believe whatever they wanted to believe," I replied. Her voice rose slightly. You stood outside that mall while people— Yes, I interrupted softly. I did. She stopped speaking because she suddenly realized something. I knew. I had seen everything. The coins, the laughter, the embarrassment. And I had never said a word. Until now. I turned back to the audience. Tonight was meant to celebrate ambition and success, I said. And I respect anyone who works hard to achieve their dreams. I looked at Vanessa again. But ambition should never come at the cost of kindness. Vanessa lowered her eyes. Daniel stood silently beside the stage. The truth had changed the atmosphere of the entire room. But the evening wasn't over yet, because the most important decision of the night was still waiting to be announced. The silence in the atrium lingered for several long seconds after I finished speaking. It wasn't the polite silence that usually follows a speech at a business event. This was different. It was the kind of silence that comes when people suddenly realize the entire story they believed about someone was wrong. Guests who had been chatting casually earlier were now sitting perfectly still. Some looked stunned. Others looked embarrassed. And a few simply looked fascinated, as if they had just witnessed the opening scene of a drama they couldn't quite believe was real. Vanessa stood on the stage beside me, her hands clasped tightly together. Her confident posture from earlier had completely disappeared. For the first time since I had known her, she looked unsure of herself. Daniel stepped closer to the stage. Mom, he said, again, his voice softer. This time I don't understand. I looked at him gently. You understand more than you think, Daniel. He ran a hand through his hair, still trying to process everything. You built the mall, he asked. I finished it, I replied. Your father started it. Daniel looked around the atrium slowly. The glass ceiling, the polished floors, the dozens of stores surrounding us. All this time, he murmured. Yes, I said. Michael Rivera stepped forward again, standing slightly behind me. He had been waiting patiently, allowing the moment to unfold. Many of the guests were now whispering to each other. I heard fragments of their conversations. She owns them all. Is that really the fruit vendor? How did no one know this? Some of the investors Vanessa had invited looked particularly uncomfortable. A few had likely walked past my fruit cart before without even glancing at me. Now they were seeing me in an entirely different light. Vanessa finally spoke again. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. Amy, why didn't you tell us? The question hung in the air. I turned toward her. You mean, why didn't I tell you that I own the mall, I asked. Yes. I considered the question carefully before answering. Because it didn't seem important. Vanessa blinked in disbelief. Not important. No. But that's a huge thing to hide. I wasn't hiding it, I said calmly. I just wasn't advertising it. A few people in the audience chuckled softly. Vanessa shook her head. But you were selling fruit outside. Yes. She gestured toward the glass entrance of the mall. Right there. Yes. Where everyone could see you. Yes. Vanessa looked genuinely confused. I just don't understand. That's all right, I said gently. You don't have to. I turned back toward the audience. My husband used to say something, I continued. He believed that when people think you have nothing, they show you exactly who they really are. The room remained completely silent. And over the past few years, I said I've had the opportunity to meet many wonderful people outside those doors. I smiled slightly. Kind people, honest people, hardworking people. Then my tone softened. But I've also met people who believe that someone's value depends entirely on how much money they appear to have. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Vanessa's face flushed slightly. She knew those words were directed at her. I didn't say her name. I didn't need to. Daniel stepped closer to the stage again. Mom, he said quietly, I'm sorry. I looked at him. For what? For asking you to stop selling fruit. I smiled. You were worried about me. I was worried about how it looked, he admitted. Yes, I said. Daniel looked down at the floor for a moment. Then he looked back at me. You should have told me the truth. I could have, I agreed. But I wanted you to build your own life first. Daniel nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand. Vanessa, however, was still struggling. But the fruit cart, she said. Her voice trembled slightly. You just stood there while people— She stopped herself before finishing the sentence. While people mocked you, while people looked down on you, while I pretended not to know you. The words remained unspoken, but everyone in the room understood them. I looked at Vanessa kindly. Vanessa, I said softly, life has a way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them. She lowered her gaze. I didn't mean to. I know, I said. And tonight isn't about embarrassing anyone. Vanessa looked surprised by that. Then why did you let him say it? She asked, glancing at Michael. Michael spoke for the first time since my speech. Because the truth matters, he said calmly. I nodded. Yes, I added. The truth matters. I turned toward the audience again. And there's one more truth I'd like to share tonight. The guest leaned forward slightly. The atmosphere in the atrium had shifted completely. What had started as a glamorous fashion launch had become something far more personal. I looked across the room slowly. Oak Ridge Mall has been very successful over the years, I said. That success belongs to the community as much as it belongs to me. I paused. And because of that, I've recently made an important decision about the future of this property. Michael smiled slightly. He knew what was coming. Daniel looked curious. Vanessa looked nervous. I took a breath before continuing. Beginning next year, I said a portion of the mall's annual profits will be placed into a new program. The room remained silent. The program will support small local businesses, people who are just starting out and need a chance. I smiled gently. People like the ones who once believed in my husband's dream. The audience began to murmur again, but this time the tone was different. Respect, curiosity, admiration. Vanessa stood very still beside me. She had spent months planning this event to celebrate her own success. But now the focus of the entire evening had shifted to something much bigger. And the final part of the story, the part that would change her life the most, hadn't even happened yet. The quiet murmurs spreading through the atrium slowly grew into applause. At first, it was only a few people, perhaps those sitting closest to the stage, who had fully absorbed what I had said. Then more hands joined in, and within seconds, the entire room was filled with the sound of clapping. It wasn't the polite applause Vanessa had received earlier for her fashion show. This applause felt deeper, more genuine. Some guests even stood as they clapped. I raised my hand gently, signaling that I wasn't finished speaking yet. The applause faded back into silence. I want to be clear about something. I continued, my voice steady through the microphone. This decision isn't about charity. It's about opportunity. I gestured toward the wide atrium around us. When my husband first imagined Oak Ridge Mall, he didn't see a building filled with luxury brands. He saw a place where people with ideas, people with determination could build something of their own. I paused briefly. He believed that success should create more success for others. Daniel was watching me carefully now, his earlier shock slowly transforming into understanding. So the new program, I continued, will provide reduced rent spaces inside the mall for small business owners who might not otherwise have the chance to open their first store. A ripple of interest moved through the crowd. Entrepreneurs in the audience leaned forward. That includes local artists, small clothing designers, family bakeries, bookstores, and community services, I added. Several guests nodded appreciatively. Because the strongest communities are built when people support each other. I lowered the microphone slightly, and I think George would have liked that. For a moment, the memory of my husband filled my thoughts again. The applause returned louder this time. Michael stepped forward again. Amy has been planning this initiative for several months, he explained to the audience. The program will be called the ***, George White Community Fund ***. The name appeared on a screen behind the stage, and the room responded with another wave of applause. Daniel wiped at his eyes quietly. Vanessa remained still. Her expression had shifted from embarrassment to something more complicated. Regret. I turned to Daniel. You asked earlier why I never told you about the mall, I said. He nodded slowly. Yes, I didn't want your life defined by something I built, I explained. I wanted you to build something yourself. Daniel swallowed. I thought you were struggling, he admitted quietly. I thought maybe you needed help. I appreciate that, I said gently. But sometimes people don't need rescuing. They just need the freedom to live their lives the way they choose. Daniel gave a small emotional smile. I guess I still have a lot to learn from you. I smiled back. We all do. Then my attention shifted toward Vanessa. She was standing a few feet away, staring at the floor. For someone who loved being the center of attention, this was probably the most uncomfortable moment she had ever experienced. But this wasn't about humiliating her. It never had been. Vanessa, I said quietly. She looked up slowly. Yes. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You worked very hard to organize tonight's event, I said. Yes, she replied. And your designs are beautiful. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise. Thank you, she said. I nodded toward the runway. You have talent. For the first time that evening, Vanessa looked genuinely unsure of what to say. I appreciate that. I continued speaking gently. But success isn't only measured by how impressive something looks. The room remained silent as everyone listened. It's also measured by how we treat the people around us while we're chasing it. Vanessa's eyes filled with emotion. She understood. More importantly, she remembered. The fruit cart. The coins tossed into the basket. The words just some street vendor. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. The words came out before she could stop them. "I shouldn't have..." Her voice broke slightly. "I shouldn't have treated you that way." The apology echoed softly across the quiet room. I stepped closer to her. "Vanessa," I said calmly, "every person in this room has made mistakes." She looked up at me. "But what matters," I continued, "is what we do after we realize them." She nodded slowly. "I understand." The tension in the room began to ease. Guests shifted in their seats again, sensing that the emotional peak of the evening was passing. Michael stepped back toward the microphone. "I believe this evening has turned into something far more meaningful than anyone expected," he said with a small smile. Several guests laughed softly. "That's certainly true," someone called out from the audience. Michael gestured toward the stage. "Before we conclude tonight's event, I'd like to invite Amy to stay for a moment while we recognize the new initiative." I nodded. But as the applause began again, my thoughts drifted briefly to something else. Tomorrow morning, the fruit cart would still be outside the mall. The same spot. The same baskets of apples and peaches. Because no matter what happened inside that building tonight, the small wooden cart outside its doors still mattered to me, more than most people in that room would ever understand. And in the days to come, that cart would become something entirely different. Not just a place to buy fruit, but a reminder. A reminder that dignity doesn't come from wealth. And sometimes, the most important truths are discovered in the simplest places. The applause eventually faded, but the atmosphere in the atrium had changed completely. The glamorous fashion launch Vanessa had planned had transformed into something much deeper. Conversations began to ripple through the room again, but now the tone was thoughtful instead of superficial. People weren't discussing fabrics or runway designs anymore. They were talking about the story they had just witnessed. I stepped down from the stage, slowly returning the microphone to Michael. He gave me a quiet nod of respect before turning back toward the audience to wrap up the formal part of the evening. As I moved through the crowd, several guests approached me. A middle-aged man in a tailored suit introduced himself first. "Mrs. White." "I'm Richard Coleman," he said, extending his hand. "I own a small publishing company here in Chicago. I had no idea you were the owner of this mall." I shook his hand politely. "Most people didn't," I replied. He smiled. "Well, I think what you're doing with the George White Community Fund is remarkable." "Thank you," I said. Another woman stepped forward. She looked to be in her early 30s, wearing a simple black dress. "My name is Carla," she said. "I run a small handmade jewelry business." Her eyes were bright with excitement. "Do you think the program you mentioned will really open spaces for small businesses?" "Yes," I replied. "We're finalizing the application process now." Her smile widened. "That could change everything for people like me." Moments like that reminded me why George's dream mattered so much. It was never about prestige. It was about opportunity. As more guests came forward to speak with me, I noticed Daniel standing a short distance away, watching quietly. Eventually, he walked over. "Mommy," said softly. "Yes, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about building my own life." I nodded. Daniel looked around the atrium again. "All these years, I thought success meant climbing higher and higher. Better clients, bigger deals, more recognition. That's how most people define it," I said. He shook his head slightly. "But tonight I realized something." "What's that?" "Success also means building something that actually helps people." I smiled. "That's a lesson your father understood very well." Daniel looked thoughtful for a moment. Then he asked quietly, "Can I help?" "With what?" "With the foundation, the George White Community Fund." His voice was sincere. "I'd like to be part of it." My heart warmed at those words. "I'd like that too," I said. We stood together for a moment, watching the guests gradually begin to leave the event. Near the stage, Vanessa was speaking quietly with several people from the fashion industry. Her posture was more subdued now, but she was still composed. When she finished her conversation, she walked slowly toward us. For a moment, the three of us simply stood there. Vanessa took a deep breath. "Amy," she said. "Yes, I've been thinking about everything you said tonight." Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of vulnerability in it that I had never heard before. "I realize I've been chasing the wrong kind of success." Daniel glanced at her, surprised. Vanessa continued, I spent so much time worrying about what people thought of me that I forgot how important it is to treat people with respect. She looked down briefly. I'm ashamed of the way I treated you. I studied her expression carefully. The regret in her eyes seemed genuine. I appreciate your honesty, I said. Vanessa looked up again. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I nodded gently. Understanding is the first step. Daniel placed a hand on Vanessa's shoulder. We all have things to learn, he said. Vanessa managed a small smile. Apparently I had a lot to learn. The tension between us began to ease. Not completely, but enough to allow the possibility of something better. After a few more minutes, most of the guests had left the atrium. The stage lights dimmed. Workers began quietly dismantling the event decorations. Michael approached us again. Well, he said with a faint grin that was certainly an unforgettable evening. Daniel laughed softly. That's one way to describe it. Michael turned to me. Are you all right, Amy? I'm perfectly fine. You handled that situation with remarkable grace. Years of selling fruit to strangers teaches you patience, I said with a smile. Michael chuckled. I suppose it does. He glanced toward the mall entrance. By the way, there's already talk spreading through the building about tonight. I'm sure there is. The staff are stunned. That's understandable. Michael hesitated for a moment before adding, people will look at that fruit cart very differently tomorrow. I followed his gaze toward the glass doors. Maybe, I said. But the cart will still be there. Daniel looked surprised. You're still going to sell fruit. Of course. Vanessa blinked. After tonight. Yes. I smiled softly. That cart was never about money. It's about staying connected to the people who walk through those doors every day. Michael shook his head in admiration. You're an extraordinary woman, Amy. I'm just a stubborn one. We all laughed quietly. Eventually, the atrium grew nearly empty. As I prepared to leave, I paused for one last look around the space. George's dream. Still alive. Still growing. And now perhaps beginning a new chapter. Because tomorrow morning, just like every other morning, I would stand behind my little fruit cart again. But this time, the story behind that cart would no longer be a secret. And sometimes, the truth has a way of changing people in ways they never expected. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. For a moment lying in bed, I thought about the events of the previous night, the stunned faces in the atrium, Daniel's emotional realization, Vanessa's apology, the way the room had shifted from glamour to reflection in the span of a single conversation. But when I looked out my window at the soft Chicago sunrise, something inside me felt surprisingly calm, because in many ways nothing had really changed, and yet everything had. I made myself a cup of coffee and stepped onto my small back porch. The air was crisp, carrying the quiet sounds of the city slowly waking up. Cars passing in the distance, a dog barking somewhere down the street. Another ordinary morning. After finishing my coffee, I did exactly what I had done thousands of times before. I loaded crates of fruit into my pickup truck. Apples, peaches, oranges, and a fresh box of strawberries. By 7:30, I was pulling into the service lot behind Oak Ridge Mall. For years, that routine had been invisible to almost everyone inside the building. Today would be different. When I rolled the fruit cart toward the main entrance, I could already see several employees standing near the doors. Frank, the security guard who had known me the longest, spotted me first. Well, I'll be, he said with a wide grin. Morning, Frank, I replied. He shook his head slowly. Mrs. White, I gotta say you gave the whole place quite a surprise last night. I've heard. A younger security guard nearby looked at me with wide eyes. You're the owner, he asked cautiously. One of them, I said gently. Frank laughed. You hear that kid? The fruit lady signs your paychecks. The young guard's face turned bright red. I'm sorry if I ever... It's all right, I said kindly. Truly. I positioned the fruit baskets on the cart just like I always did. Within minutes, the morning employees began arriving. Harold the janitor stopped in his tracks when he saw me. Well, I'll be damned, he said quietly. I saw the video online this morning. What video, I asked. Someone recorded the whole thing last night. It's everywhere. He pulled out his phone and showed me. Sure enough, a clip of Michael announcing my name at the event had already spread across social media. The caption read, **** fruit vendor revealed as owner of entire mall, ****. I chuckled softly. Well, that's one way to put it. Harold shook his head. You're something else, Mrs. White. He still bought his usual apple. Some things never change. Around 8 o'clock, Lily the barista came rushing out of the mall entrance. Amy, she exclaimed, Yes. You're famous now. I doubt that. No, seriously, she said, holding up her phone. My friends have been sending me this video all morning. She looked at me with amazement. I can't believe you own them all. I handed her a peach. On the house today. She laughed. I guess I've been getting coffee for a millionaire all this time. I prefer the term fruit vendor. Lily smiled. You're the coolest boss ever. As the morning continued, more people stopped by the cart than usual. Some were curious. Others simply wanted to say hello. A few apologized awkwardly for moments when they had ignored me before, but most of them treated me exactly the same way they always had. And that was the best outcome I could have hoped for. Around 10 o'clock, a familiar car pulled into the parking lot. Daniel stepped out first. Vanessa followed. They walked toward the cart together. Daniel was smiling. Vanessa looked a little nervous. Good morning, Daniel said. Morning, I replied. He looked at the fruit baskets. You're really doing this again today. Of course. Vanessa stepped forward slowly. Amy, she said. Yes. Would it be all right if I helped? I raised an eyebrow. Help? She nodded. I mean, if you don't mind. I handed her a basket of strawberries. Here, I said, you can arrange these. Vanessa laughed nervously. I've never worked a fruit stand before. There's a first time for everything. Daniel leaned against the cart. I still can't believe you've been doing this for years. You'd be surprised how much you learned standing behind a fruit cart, I said. Vanessa finished arranging the strawberries. She looked at them thoughtfully. You know, she said quietly, this might be the most honest business environment I've ever seen. What do you mean? People aren't pretending here, she said. They either want fruit or they don't. I smiled. That's a good observation. Daniel picked up an orange. How much? $2. He handed me the money. Then he laughed. I just bought fruit from the richest woman I know. Correction, I said. You bought fruit from your mother. We stood there together for a moment as the morning crowd continued flowing in and out of the mall. Vanessa looked toward the glass entrance. I think I understand now, she said softly. Understand what? Why you never left this spot? I looked at the mall behind us, then back at the cart. This place reminds me that success isn't measured by how high you climb. Sometimes it's measured by how grounded you stay. Vanessa nodded slowly, and for the first time since I had known her, she truly seemed to understand. The fruit cart remained in its usual place that day, and the day after, and the day after that, because no matter how big Oak Ridge Mall became, the little wooden cart outside its doors would always remind people of something far more important. That dignity doesn't come from wealth. Respect doesn't come from status. And sometimes the most powerful stories begin with something as simple as a basket of fruit. Life has a quiet way of revealing who people truly are. Sometimes it happens in boardrooms or business deals, but more often it happens in small, ordinary moments when someone believes they are dealing with a person who has no power, no influence, and no importance. That's when character shows itself most clearly. For years, people walked past my fruit cart and made assumptions about my life. Some saw an elderly woman trying to survive. Others saw someone beneath their attention. A few showed kindness and a few showed cruelty. But every one of those reactions told me something important. Because respect should never depend on wealth. Dignity should never depend on titles. And kindness should never depend on who we think someone might be. The truth is, every person we meet is carrying a story we don't know. The janitor buying an apple might be supporting a family. The young barista giving away free coffee might be working 3 jobs to pay for college. And the quiet woman selling fruit outside a mall might just be the person who built the entire place. So the next time you encounter someone who seems ordinary, take a moment before you judge them. You never know who they truly are, or what they've been through, or what they might teach you. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever seen someone judged unfairly because of their appearance or job? What would you have done if you were in Vanessa's position? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about resilience, dignity, and unexpected justice, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. It always amazes me how stories like this travel across the world. Until next time, take care of each other.